Hey there, welcome to Film in the Blank. My name's Ian, I watch a lot of movies, here's everything I watched this month. I started the month off with 1975's Jeanne Dielman 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Brussels, written and directed by Chantal Akerman. It's one thing to be a perfect film, it's another thing entirely to have a reputation as a perfect film, go into a first-time watch expecting nothing less, and still being blown away. As a character, Jeanne is a massive enigma, from her hypnotically calm life, to her unrepentantly muted dreams and expectations, to most worryingly, her air of staunch unfeelingness. At the beginning, we drift between everyday moments, spared from seeing the true bursts of existential horror in Jeanne's day that the last third of the film forces you to look at. Jeanne's pensive periods, sitting pondering her existence, turn from potentially content blank stares to flashing red lights of her fraying mental state, and the slow unraveling is hyper-realist cinema at its best. 5 stars. Then Big Brother Vatican City Edition, Conclave, written by Peter Strawn and directed by Edward Berger. The movie that proves, once you pope, you just can't stope. This is about as successful of a film as you could ever dream of turning a pulpy airport read into, with solid direction, simple yet memorable cinematography, and a cast of actors who know how to externalize very internalized characters. It feels a bit like it's a late 2000s era Oscar movie, so not as hyped on it being so dominant in several Oscar categories this year, but it is the clear frontrunner for the Oscar for Best Clusterfuck of a panicked post-screening phone call from my mom and shocked aunts who needed the ending explained to them. 4 stars. Next, a classic Best Picture, 1951's An American in Paris, written by Alan J. Lerner and directed by Vincent Minnelli. There's a good amount to enjoy here, mainly centering around those exuberant musical numbers. What I was really struck by this time, though, was how the film introduces character. From learning about Gene Kelly's character through his choreographed morning routine in his cramped apartment, to color-blocked portraits of Leslie Caron's character accompanying someone else describing her, to a first-person introduction to another character. Vincent Minnelli was pushing storytelling forward with his direction, which probably helped disguise the fact that the story is 1 pound of plot in a 10-pound bag, and that Gene Kelly can't wear a hat normally to save his life. 4 stars. Next, a film I thought would never reach the big screen, Wicked, written by Winnie Holzman and directed by John M. Chu. I saw this after a drink or two on my birthday, so my analytical glasses with the weird crossbar thing weren't really on. Compared to the train wreck I've worried this could turn into for years in the wrong hands, I thought John M. Chu did a good job. He got the right people to do the production design and costumes, maybe not the best person to do the cinematography, but I had fun. I didn't need all the pauses and bits of dialogue they shoved into the middle of the songs every few bars, that killed a bit of the momentum for me. Still, 4 stars. Then a stellar contained thriller, 1982's Deathtrap, written by J. Preston Allen and directed by Sidney Lumet. This knocked it out of the park for me when I first watched it a few years ago, and on a rewatch, knowing the ample twists and turns, it still slaps. There's only one set, a handful of characters, and several plays worth of dialogue, but it's a ride that flawlessly flips expectation on its head, with equal parts humor and tension and stellar performances from Michael Caine, Christopher Reeve, and Diane Cannon. Between this and 1976's Network, Sidney Lumet is truly the goat of showcasing humor without sacrificing non-comedic tone. 4.5 stars. Then I watched Rumours, written by Evan Johnson and directed by Evan Johnson, Galen Johnson, and Guy Madden. No movie has had painful first draft stamped on its forehead more than this. The script goes absolutely nowhere, it's a meandering, boring ride for most of the slog, and even Cate Blanchett can't find much to do with a fun role. Maybe having 3 directors isn't the best idea, just a thought. 2 stars. Next, one of my favorite films from 2024, Janet Planet, written and directed by Annie Baker. This was shot beautifully, with an emphasis on static camera work and quiet still life scenes. It has a pulsing sense of curiosity driving the narrative, which follows Lacey, an offbeat young girl whose increasing desire to form her own worldview is rooted entirely in her bohemian single mother. I loved Zoe Ziegler as Lacey, but it's Julianne Nicholson as Janet herself who lives up to the enamoring title by reminding everyone why she's one of the great emotive actors of our time. I can't ask for much more in a film. 4.5 stars. Then some high-concept B-movie thrills with 1970's Equinox, written and directed by Jack Woods. Like its namesake Jim, Equinox is a confusing journey through a barren hellscape filled with personality-less people and dead-eyed monsters. There also weren't any towels anywhere. 2.5 stars. Then a western like no other, 1961's One-Eyed Jacks, written by Guy Trosper and Calder Willingham and directed by Marlon Brando. One-Eyed Jacks is the only film Marlon Brando ever directed, and that's a crime because this rocks so hard. Admittedly, it seems the production was a long slog that went well over budget, but when the result is this strong, let the man cook. The film follows Marlon Brando as a bank robber fresh out of prison and intent on seeking revenge against his former partner, played by Karl Malden, who betrayed him, took their loot, and reinvented himself as the sheriff of a small California town. If the ending had a bit more narrative heft, this would be pretty unstoppable. The story feels grand and steeped in emotion, bolstered tremendously by Charles Lang's breathtaking cinematography shot in VistaVision. It was one of the last films shot in VistaVision until Brady Corbet's The Brutalist last year, which begs the question, why did we ever stop shooting in VistaVision? Truly, why? 4.5 stars. Then, does anyone smell pie? It's Heretic, written and directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. I'd love a big, fat plate of what the first half was cooking. Things were tense, well-paced, and intriguing. The second half struggled to maintain much of any of that for long stretches, settling for bursts of head-scratching plot twists as entertainment. The performances were great throughout, and I really loved what the movie set up, so 3 stars. Then I finally got around to another wild film from Melvin Van Peebles with 1970's Watermelon Man, written by Norman Raucher and directed by Melvin Van Peebles. This film starts off sprinting and never stops, full of manic performances, brilliant throwaway lines, and surprisingly thoughtful racial commentary for a film about a white man who wakes up one day as a black man. It's definitely rough around the edges, which I'm learning more and more can help define a film's voice in the 70s more than it detracts. 4 stars. Next, a biopic of everybody's favorite insurance mascot, Flo, written by Gen Silbalotis and Matis Kaza, and directed by Gen Silbalotis. As a virulent anti-cat person, this melted my heart in such a surprising way, being able to unplug from the typical film brain questions around what's going on in this world and just focus on the animals themselves, with their clashing personalities and ability to forge relationships regardless, was such a treat. It's a more than worthy animated feature Oscar winner, and I hope that Oscar voters continue this trend of recognizing untraditional non-studio films in more categories, especially in animation, which has been dominated by Disney for too long. 4 stars. Next, mark your calendars, it's 2007's 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, written and directed by Christian Mungiu. I think this is a masterpiece. From the first frame of a ticking clock setting the fraught tone of the film, to that wildly unsettling final shot that's one of the most interactive moments between art and audience, full stop, I couldn't look away. I especially connected with the long, static shots filmed in handheld so you're never unaware of the human element. So many clever components of filmmaking synthesizing into a great work of art. 5 stars. Then one of the clear standouts of the month, 1979's And Justice for All, written by Valerie Curtin and Barry Levinson, and directed by Norman Jewison. The secret ingredient in a pitch-black comedy truly succeeding is a lead performer with stellar acting chops who commits. Following in the footsteps of Peter Finch in Network or Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangelove, Al Pacino acts his ass off in this film about the cosmically unbalanced sense of justice that governs our legal system. Even if you're not clued into the farcical elements and through line of broad comedy coursing through the film, it works as a dramatic piece as well. I'd expect nothing less from a versatile director who can make hard-hitting dramas like In the Heat of the Night, just as well as romantic comedy gems like Moonstruck. 4.5 stars. Then another Oscar hopeful, A Real Pain, written and directed by Jesse Eisenberg. I thought this was solidly assembled and it did have a few nice moments, but I ended up pretty muted on this compared to most people who fell head over heels for it. I thought there were far better supporting actors to give an Oscar to this year than Kieran Culkin, like Guy Pearce in The Brutalist or Josh O'Connor in Challengers, to name a few. But nowhere near a bad performance either, so not a hill I'm gonna die on. 3.5 stars. Next. Written and directed by Jacques Audiard. Even without Carla Sofia Gascon's ugly tweets and disastrous media response cratering this film's chances at the Oscars, it was a mess. Most of the songs are cringy, poorly written, or both, the plot gets weaker and makes less sense as it goes on, and its message is muddled. If not for some admittedly solid performances, this would be a total loss. 2 stars. Then some Michelle Yeoh magic with 1993's The Heroic Trio, written by Sandy Shaw and directed by Johnny To. The Heroic Trio is your classic tale of a super eunuch stealing all the babies to turn them into invisible assassin slaves, but luckily Michelle Yeoh, Maggie Cheung, and Anita Mui are on the case. It mixes some physics-defying wuxia martial arts with more genre elements of horror and fantasy, so it's never boring. I'd say it's just muddled. There's a lot going on, emotions are always jarringly high, and the kooky elements stick out more than they blend in, but quite a lot of bang for your buck if nothing else. 3 stars. And I followed The Heroic Trio up with its sequel, 1993's Executioners, written by Suzanne Chan and directed by Johnny To and Siu Tung Ching. This worked more for me than The Heroic Trio because they found a better balance of a heightened world to match the zany tone. Compared to the first film that takes place in everyday life, Executioners goes full dystopian with a nuclear attack, a limited water supply, and a darker villain plotline. It still has a lot of the original's off-the-wall action and kooky elements, but it all meshes better and takes some more daring swings with the story along the way. 3.5 stars. Then another A24 gem from last year, Dìdi, written and directed by Sean Wong. It's alarming how spookily perfectly this nailed the early 2000s. Like, damn Sean Wong, I barely made it out of that era with my AIM username and post 9/11 dread. Warn a guy before you send me back. Isaac Wong is a fantastic lead who plays the cringe and heart at the core of his character really well, and Joan Chen made the most of her minimal screen time to give the film more depth than I was expecting. 4 stars. Next, sequel no one was really clamoring for, Gladiator II, written by David Scarpa and directed by Ridley Scott. Long before I sat down to see this, I accepted that most likely this was going to be a puffy pecs convention more than a fully fleshed out film, and just to be clear, I was fine with that. This peeked its head out of lackluster retreading territory here and there, usually when Denzel was waving his toga flaps around, but Ridley Scott has really started to peter out as a director over the last decade. He still knows how to assemble a film better than most modern directors, but the projects he's choosing and his inability to find interesting storylines in seemingly mineable projects is pretty confounding. In other words,
boof.
3 stars. Next, some classic Steve McQueen in 1968's Bullitt, written by Alan Trestman and Harry Kleiner, and directed by Peter Yates. Lalo Schifrin's exceptional score floored me, but the way it disappears in the big sequences to let the tension speak for itself, rather than coating it in unnecessary musical coloring, is such a power move. Modern action composers take note. The plot isn't all that notable, and I really wish Jacqueline Bisset had much more to do for an actress of her caliber, pun intended, but this movie is all vibes, cars, and grit, and it works. 4 stars. And I finished the month out with 1982's Tron, written and directed by Steven Lisberger. Occasionally, I'll revisit Tron in the hopes that it's finally become retro cool and soon realize that it's perpetually a dorky throwback. Disney seems to have the same impulse every so often and tries to reinvent it with a sequel to middling results. My hopes aren't high that this year's Tron Ares will be any different. 2.5 stars. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on these movies, any others I should check out, what makes you go
Boof.
Also stay tuned for other great commentary videos, reviews, video essays, and more. You can check me out on Letterboxd at Cineramadome24 or on TikTok at Film in the Blank. I appreciate you liking and subscribing. See you next time.